My parents kicked me out on Christmas, then screamed when they saw who owned their dream house. I never imagined that Christmas morning would end with my mother throwing my belongings onto the snow-covered driveway while my father changed the locks, all because I refused to break up with my boyfriend Daniel for not being successful enough for the Peterson family reputation. Even less could I have anticipated the look of absolute horror on their faces 18 months later when they discovered that the magnificent lakefront mansion they'd been desperately trying to buy for their social climbing ambitions belonged to me, the daughter they'd disowned for choosing love over their twisted version of family loyalty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But that moment of crystal clear vindication became the catalyst that not only revealed the true depth of their manipulation, but transformed me from the obedient daughter who had spent 25 years seeking their approval into a woman who finally understood that some bridges are meant to be burned. My name is Sarah Peterson, and until that devastating Christmas morning, I had been the perfect daughter in every way that mattered to my parents. Straight A's through high school, Dean's List at Northwestern University, MBA from Chicago Booth, and a promising career in tech consulting that allowed me to send money home every month to help with my younger brother's college expenses. I had followed every rule, met every expectation, and sacrificed countless personal desires to maintain the pristine image my parents had crafted for our family in the affluent suburb of Millbrook Heights. The Peterson family had always been obsessed with appearances. My father, Robert Peterson, worked as a senior manager at a regional insurance company, a respectable position that provided a comfortable middle-class lifestyle, but never quite delivered the prestige he craved. My mother, Linda Peterson, had given up her teaching career when she married, dedicating herself instead to social climbing through volunteer work with various charity organizations, where she could network with the wives of truly wealthy families. Their entire identity revolved around the perception of success rather than actual achievement. Every decision, from our neighborhood to our vacation destinations to the cars we drove, was calculated to project an image of prosperity that exceeded our actual financial reality. They lived in constant fear of being exposed as ordinary middle-class people rather than the affluent social elite they pretended to be. This obsession had shaped every aspect of my upbringing. I wasn't encouraged to pursue passions or develop authentic interests. Instead, I was groomed to enhance the family's social standing through academic achievement, appropriate friendships with other successful families, and eventually, a strategic marriage to someone who could elevate our status even further. The pressure had been relentless but subtle. When I expressed interest in art during middle school, my mother had gently redirected me toward more practical pursuits that would look better on college applications. When I wanted to attend a state university to study graphic design, my father had insisted on Northwestern's business program, arguing that it would provide better networking opportunities. Every choice I made was filtered through their assessment of how it would impact the family's reputation. I had internalized these expectations so completely that I rarely questioned them. The desire to make my parents proud, to justify their sacrifices and maintain their approval, had become the driving force in my life. I dated men they approved of, accepted job offers they deemed appropriate, and carefully curated my social media presence to reflect the successful, sophisticated image they demanded. Daniel Morrison had never fit into this carefully constructed framework. I had met him during a weekend hiking trip with friends, far from the professional networking events and charity galas that comprised my usual social calendar. He was a carpenter who specialized in custom furniture, working with his hands to create beautiful, functional pieces that he sold through local galleries and craft shows. Daniel was everything my parents had taught me to avoid in a potential partner. He worked in a blue-collar profession, drove a modest pickup truck instead of a luxury sedan, and lived in a converted warehouse space that he had renovated himself, rather than an upscale apartment in a prestigious neighborhood. By every metric my parents used to measure worth, Daniel should have been completely unsuitable. But Daniel possessed qualities I had never encountered in the men my parents had. Encouraged me to date. He was genuinely passionate about his work, creating furniture pieces that were both artistic and functional, taking pride in craftsmanship rather than profit margins. He listened when I spoke, asked thoughtful questions about my goals and dreams, and never tried to reshape my opinions to match his own preferences. Most importantly, Daniel saw me as an individual rather than as a reflection of family expectations or social status. When I was with him, I felt authentic in a way I had never experienced before. I could express opinions without calculating their impact on others' perceptions, pursue interests without considering their strategic value, and simply exist without the constant performance that had defined my life since childhood. For the first time in my adult life, I had discovered what genuine connection felt like. Daniel challenged me intellectually, supported my ambitions, and created space for aspects of my personality that I had suppressed for years to maintain family harmony. With him, I began to remember dreams and interests I had abandoned long ago in favor of more appropriate pursuits. We had been dating for 8 months when I finally introduced him to my parents. I had delayed the introduction as long as possible, knowing instinctively that they would disapprove of his profession and lifestyle. But our relationship had become serious enough that continued secrecy felt dishonest to both Daniel and myself. The dinner had been a disaster from the moment Daniel arrived at our house in Millbrook Heights. My mother had answered the door with a smile that never reached her eyes, taking in his worn leather jacket and work boots with barely concealed disdain. My father had made small talk about Daniel's business with the condescending tone he used when speaking to service providers, asking questions that were clearly designed to highlight the differences in their professional status rather than express genuine interest. Throughout the meal, my parents had deployed every subtle intimidation tactic they had perfected over years of social maneuvering. They discussed expensive vacations Daniel couldn't afford, referenced exclusive social events he would never be invited to, and made casual comments about the importance of ambitious career paths that would provide security for future families. Daniel had handled their hostility with remarkable grace, answering their probing questions honestly while refusing to be defensive about his choices. He spoke passionately about his work, explaining the satisfaction he found in creating pieces that would last for generations, describing the relationships he had built with clients who valued craftsmanship over mass production. But his composure and dignity had only seemed to increase my parents' disapproval. They wanted him to be defensive, apologetic, or intimidated by their superior social position. His quiet confidence in his own worth, despite their obvious attempts to diminish him, threatened the hierarchical worldview that defined their identity. After Daniel left that evening, my parents had launched into a coordinated campaign to end our relationship. The tactics were sophisticated and relentless, designed to appear supportive while systematically undermining my confidence in our compatibility. My mother had begun forwarding articles about the importance of financial compatibility in marriages, emphasizing statistics about divorce rates among couples with significant income disparities. She had arranged casual encounters with eligible bachelors from prominent families, always with innocent explanations about why these meetings were necessary for professional or social reasons. My father had taken a more direct approach, questioning my judgment and maturity while expressing concern about my future security. He had calculated hypothetical family budgets that demonstrated how Daniel's income could never support the lifestyle I had been raised to expect, implying that I would inevitably become resentful and unhappy. The pressure had been constant, but never explicitly demanding. They never directly ordered me to break up with Daniel, instead creating an atmosphere of perpetual disappointment and concern that made me question my own decisions. They had mastered the art of emotional manipulation, expressing their objections through worried sighs, meaningful glances, and carefully crafted expressions of parental anxiety. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. For months, I had tried to navigate between their expectations and my feelings for Daniel. I had attempted to help him understand their perspective while trying to convince them to see his positive qualities. I had hoped that time would soften their opposition, that they would eventually recognize his character and integrity, even if they couldn't approve of his profession. But their campaign had only intensified as our relationship deepened. When Daniel and I had begun discussing moving in together, my mother had developed mysterious health issues that required increased emotional support. When we had talked about long-term commitment, my father had suddenly needed help with complicated financial decisions that demanded my immediate attention. Every milestone in our relationship had been met with escalating family crises that seemed to require my presence and loyalty. The message was clear. I could choose Daniel, or I could choose my family, but I couldn't have both. The final confrontation had been building for weeks leading up to Christmas. My parents had made it increasingly obvious that Daniel was not welcome at family gatherings, creating logistical obstacles whenever I tried to include him in holiday plans. They had scheduled important family discussions during times when I had already made commitments with Daniel, forcing me to choose between them repeatedly. Christmas Eve had been particularly tense. During our traditional family dinner, my parents had presented their ultimatum with the careful staging they brought to all their most important manipulations. They had waited until after the meal, when the atmosphere was warm with holiday sentiment and family togetherness, to deliver their demands. My mother had begun with tears, expressing her disappointment that I seemed to be drifting away from family values and traditions. She had spoken about the importance of choosing partners who shared our background and aspirations, who could contribute meaningfully to the family's continued success and social standing. My father had followed with practical concerns, outlining the financial implications of my relationship with Daniel and questioning whether I was thinking clearly about my future. He had presented a detailed analysis of career trajectories and earning potential, demonstrating mathematically why my relationship was doomed to failure. But beneath their expressed concerns, I had finally recognized the true nature of their objections. This wasn't about Daniel's financial prospects or our compatibility. This was about control, about their need to shape every aspect of my life to serve their social ambitions. Daniel represented the possibility that I might prioritize my own happiness over their expectations, and that threat to their authority was unacceptable. Their ultimatum had been simple and brutal: break up with Daniel immediately, or face the consequences of choosing him over family loyalty. They had made it clear that continued defiance would result in complete estrangement, financial abandonment, and social exile from the family circle that had defined my identity for 25 years. Standing in their elegant living room on Christmas Eve, surrounded by expensive decorations and family photos that documented my lifelong compliance with their wishes, I had experienced a moment of perfect clarity. I could see the invisible cage they had constructed around my life, the elaborate system of expectations and obligations that had controlled my choices while allowing me to believe I was free. For years, I had mistaken their manipulation for love, their control for guidance, their demands for reasonable expectations. I had sacrificed my authentic self to maintain their approval, believing that family harmony was worth any personal cost. But in that moment, looking at their faces as they waited for my surrender, I finally understood the price of that harmony. Christmas morning had dawned with deceptive normalcy. I had woken early in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the carefully curated artifacts of the daughter they had shaped me to be. Academic awards, photographs from approved social events, mementos from vacations designed to project success rather than create memories. I had dressed carefully for what I somehow knew would be my final performance as their compliant daughter. The emerald green dress they had given me for Christmas the previous year, selected because it photographed well at social events and complemented my complexion in ways that enhanced the family's image. Pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, passed down not as sentimental heirlooms, but as symbols of generational respectability. Downstairs, my parents had prepared an elaborate Christmas breakfast, another element of their carefully orchestrated family traditions. The dining room table had been set with their finest china, the one reserved for occasions when appearances mattered most. Every detail had been designed to create an atmosphere of warmth and celebration that would make my anticipated capitulation seem natural and loving. My younger brother Jake had been there as well, home from college for winter break. Jake had always been the easier child, naturally inclined toward the achievements and attitudes our parents valued. He was studying finance at their alma mater, dating a girl from an appropriately prominent family, and following the pathway they had mapped out for him without question or resistance. Jake's presence had been strategic, I realized later. They had wanted him to witness my submission, to see that family loyalty ultimately triumphed over individual desires. His approval would validate their methods while reinforcing the consequences of defiance for future reference. The conversation had begun casually, with gift exchanges and holiday pleasantries that maintained the facade of normal family celebration, but I had recognized the underlying tension, the careful positioning that preceded their most important manipulations. My parents had exchanged meaningful glances, coordinating their approach with the precision of experienced negotiators. "Sarah, darling," my mother had begun, her voice carrying the perfect blend of affection and concern that she used for her most effective emotional appeals. "Your father and I have been thinking about our conversation yesterday evening. We want you to know that everything we've said comes from a place of love and genuine concern for your future happiness." My father had nodded gravely, reinforcing her words with his most paternal expression. "We understand that Daniel seems like a nice young man, and we're not questioning his character. But, sweetheart, compatibility requires more than personal attraction. It requires shared values, similar goals, and practical considerations about building a life together." They had been building toward their familiar arguments, the carefully constructed logic they had used to justify their interference in every aspect of my life. But this time, instead of defensive explanations or emotional appeals, I had felt only a strange sense of detachment, as if I were observing their manipulation tactics from outside the situation. "We've been discussing this as a family," my mother had continued, her tone becoming more serious. "And we think it would be best if you ended this relationship sooner rather than later. The longer you wait, the more difficult it will become. And frankly, we're concerned about the impact it's having on your judgment and priorities." She had paused dramatically, allowing the weight of her words to settle before delivering the ultimatum they had clearly rehearsed. "We love you unconditionally, Sarah, but we can't support choices that we believe will ultimately cause you pain and disappointment. If you can't see the wisdom in ending this relationship voluntarily, we'll have to take steps to protect the family from the consequences of poor decision-making." The threat had been delivered with practiced precision, disguised as parental concern while making their demands perfectly clear. Submit to their control, or face the loss of everything they had taught me to value: family connection, financial, security, social status, and the identity they had spent 25 years constructing. Jake had been watching these proceedings with obvious discomfort, clearly aware that he was witnessing something significant but uncertain about his role in the unfolding drama. His presence had added another layer of pressure, the knowledge that my response would be observed and judged by the sibling whose approval I had always sought. Standing in that familiar dining room, surrounded by the trappings of the life they had designed for me, I had experienced a moment of absolute clarity about the choice I faced. I could surrender to their demands one final time, accepting their authority over my most intimate decisions in exchange for continued inclusion in their version of family. Or I could finally choose authenticity over approval, love over manipulation, my own happiness over their social ambitions. The decision, when it came, had felt surprisingly easy. All the anxiety and uncertainty that had plagued me for months had crystallized into simple, unshakable conviction. "No," I had said quietly, the word falling into the silence of their expectant faces like a stone into still water. I won't break up with Daniel. I won't sacrifice my happiness for your social climbing anymore. And I won't pretend that your manipulation is love or that your control is guidance. The reaction had been immediate and explosive. My mother's careful composure had shattered instantly, replaced by the raw fury of someone whose authority had been challenged for the first time. My father's paternal concern had disappeared, revealing the cold calculation that had always lurked beneath his expressions of family loyalty. "You ungrateful, selfish girl," my mother had hissed, her voice shaking with rage. "After everything we've given you, every sacrifice we've made, this is how you repay us? By throwing away your future for some common laborer who will never be able to provide for you properly?" My father had been more controlled, but equally vicious. "If you walk out that door to be with him, you're no longer our daughter. Don't expect any support, financial or otherwise. Don't expect to be welcome at family gatherings. Don't expect us to clean up the mess when your poor choices inevitably lead to disaster." But their threats, which should have terrified me, had instead filled me with an unexpected sense of liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I was seeing them clearly, without the filter of childhood conditioning or the desperate need for their approval. They weren't concerned parents trying to protect me from poor decisions. They were controlling individuals whose identity depended on their ability to shape my life according to their preferences. "I understand," I had replied, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "You're making it clear that your love is conditional on my compliance with your expectations. That's valuable information, and I appreciate your honesty." Jake had tried to intervene, clearly hoping to defuse the situation before it reached the point of no return. "Sarah, come on. Maybe we can find some middle ground here. Mom and Dad are just worried about you. They don't really mean—" "Yes, they do," I had interrupted gently, looking at my younger brother with genuine affection for perhaps the last time. "And that's okay, Jake. People are allowed to prioritize their social status over their children's happiness, but I'm also allowed to choose differently." What had followed was a theatrical display of wounded parental authority that would have been comical if it hadn't been so devastating. My mother had collapsed into strategic tears, lamenting the destruction of family unity and questioning where she had gone wrong in raising such a selfish daughter. My father had begun making phone calls to various family members, ensuring that their version of events would reach the extended family before I could explain my perspective. Within an hour, they had transformed from loving parents into complete strangers executing a systematic campaign to erase me from their lives. My belongings had been gathered from throughout the house and unceremoniously packed into garbage bags. My room had been immediately claimed for my father's home office expansion. My car, which was technically in their name despite my monthly payments, had been declared family property that I was no longer entitled to use. The most surreal moment had come when my mother had demanded the return of gifts they had given me over the years, claiming that my betrayal had retroactively invalidated my right to keep family heirlooms and expensive presents. She had tried to remove the pearl earrings from my ears, as if reclaiming them could undo the reality of my independence. By noon on Christmas Day, I had been standing on their front porch with 3 garbage bags of possessions, watching my father change the locks, while neighbors pretended not to notice the dramatic scene unfolding in the affluent subdivision where public displays of family dysfunction were considered deeply inappropriate. The snow had been falling steadily, transforming the manicured landscape of Millbrook Heights into a winter wonderland that mocked the devastation of my personal circumstances. I had called Daniel from my cell phone, explaining the situation, with a composure that had surprised even me. He had arrived within 30 minutes, his pickup truck looking distinctly out of place among the luxury sedans and SUVs that typically populated our neighborhood. His face had been grim with controlled anger as he helped me load my meager possessions, but he had been careful not to let my parents see his emotions. "You don't have to do this," he had said quietly as we drove away from the only home I had ever known. I would understand if you wanted to go back, try to work things out with them. I never wanted to be the reason you lost your family. But I had felt no regret, no desire to return to the prison of their expectations. Instead, I had experienced a profound sense of relief, as if I had finally stopped holding my breath after 25 years of careful suffocation. They were never really my family, I had replied, watching Millbrook Heights disappear in the rearview mirror. Family doesn't use love as a weapon or make acceptance conditional on compliance. What I lost today wasn't worth keeping. Daniel had taken me to his warehouse apartment, a space that couldn't have been more different from the suburban perfection I had just abandoned. The converted industrial building was raw and authentic, filled with the tools of his trade and examples of his craftsmanship. There was beauty in its functionality, character in its imperfections, and genuine warmth in its lack of pretense. That first night, sleeping on Daniel's couch while snow continued to fall outside the tall windows, I had begun to understand what I had actually gained through my loss. For the first time in my adult life, I was free to make decisions based on my own values rather than calculated assessments of parental approval. I could pursue relationships, career opportunities, and personal interests without filtering every choice through their expectations. The relief had been profound but complicated by practical concerns about my immediate future. I had a good job in tech consulting, but my salary had been structured around family support and the assumption of parental emergency backup. Living independently in Chicago without family financial assistance would require significant lifestyle adjustments and careful budgeting. More challenging was the social isolation that resulted from my parents' systematic campaign to control the narrative of our estrangement. Within days of Christmas, I had received concerned calls from aunts, uncles, and family friends who had been told that I was having some kind of breakdown, making irrational decisions under the influence of an inappropriate boyfriend who was taking advantage of my emotional vulnerability. My parents had crafted their version of events with typical sophistication, portraying themselves as heartbroken parents whose ungrateful daughter had chosen a manipulative relationship over family loyalty. They had highlighted Daniel's blue-collar profession while omitting any mention of his character, integrity, or the depth of our connection. The extended family's response had been predictably aligned with my parents' preferences. These were people who shared their values about social status and appropriate life choices, who had always reinforced their authority and supported their decisions. My perspective was dismissed as temporary emotional confusion that would eventually resolve itself when I came to my senses and returned to family expectations. But rather than feeling isolated by their rejection, I had discovered unexpected freedom in their disapproval. Without the constant pressure to maintain family harmony, I could finally examine my own values and preferences without external interference. I could explore career opportunities that genuinely interested me, rather than those that would photograph well at social events. I could develop friendships based on mutual interests, rather than strategic networking potential. Most importantly, I could fully invest in my relationship with Daniel without constantly defending our compatibility to people who had already decided he was unsuitable. Without the background noise of family disapproval, I could appreciate his qualities without reservation and build our connection on the solid foundation of mutual respect and authentic affection. During those early weeks of independence, I had also begun to recognize patterns in my parents' behavior that I had previously dismissed as normal family dynamics. Their need to control every aspect of my life hadn't been loving guidance, but systematic manipulation designed to serve their social ambitions. Their emotional support had always been conditional on my compliance with their expectations, withdrawn whenever I showed signs of independent thinking. The revelation had been both liberating and painful. Liberating because it explained years of confused feelings about family relationships that had never quite felt authentic. Painful because it forced me to acknowledge that the people I had spent my life trying to please, had never actually seen me as an individual worth knowing and supporting for my own sake. Daniel had been remarkably patient during this period of adjustment and self-discovery. He had provided emotional support without trying to influence my processing of family dynamics, offering perspective without attempting to shape my conclusions. He had understood instinctively that I needed space to figure out who I was without parental expectations defining my identity. His warehouse had become my sanctuary during this transition, a place where I could exist authentically without performance or pretense. I had begun to rediscover interests and talents I had suppressed over the years, spending evenings learning about woodworking and furniture design while Daniel worked on his commissions. Those quiet hours in his workshop had been profoundly healing, watching him transform raw materials into beautiful, functional objects through skill and patience. There was something deeply satisfying about witnessing creation rather than constantly managing appearances and social positioning. As winter had melted into spring, I had begun to build a new life structure around authentic choices rather than inherited expectations. I had changed jobs, moving from the prestigious consulting firm my parents had encouraged me to join to a smaller technology startup where my skills were more directly valued and my contributions more immediately visible. The salary reduction had been significant, but the trade-off in job satisfaction and creative fulfillment had been immeasurable. For the first time in my career, I was working on projects that genuinely excited me rather than simply advancing through predetermined professional pathways designed to enhance family status. I had also begun to develop friendships with people Daniel introduced me to, artists and craftspeople who valued creativity and authenticity over social status and financial accumulation. These relationships had been refreshingly direct and honest, free from the complex social maneuvering that had characterized my previous social circle. But the most significant change had been in my relationship with Daniel himself. Without the constant background pressure of family disapproval, our connection had deepened and strengthened in ways I hadn't anticipated. We had moved in together officially, combining our lives and resources while maintaining individual identities and interests. Living with Daniel had taught me what genuine partnership looked like. He supported my goals without trying to reshape them, encouraged my growth without attempting to direct it, and shared his own dreams and challenges without expecting me to solve them. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and authentic affection rather than strategic compatibility or social advantage. During this period of rebuilding and self-discovery, I had occasionally wondered about my parents and whether they ever questioned their handling of our confrontation. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that they were presenting themselves as the wounded parties in our estrangement, maintaining their narrative that I had chosen an inappropriate relationship over family loyalty. But I had felt no desire to reconnect or attempt reconciliation. The clarity that had emerged from our final confrontation had only strengthened over time, confirming that their love had always been conditional on my compliance with their expectations. The daughter they claimed to miss had never really existed. She had been a carefully constructed performance designed to serve their social ambitions. As months passed without contact, I had begun to understand that true family wasn't defined by blood relationships or shared history, but by mutual support, respect, and unconditional acceptance. Daniel had become my family in ways my biological parents never had, offering the kind of love that enhanced rather than constrained, that celebrated rather than corrected. The seasons had changed, and with them, my entire understanding of what constituted a meaningful life. The metrics my parents had taught me to value, social status, financial accumulation, professional prestige, had been replaced by more authentic measures of success. Personal growth, creative fulfillment, genuine relationships, and the satisfaction of building something meaningful with someone who truly knew and appreciated me. But even as I had built this new life around authentic choices and values, I had never entirely escaped the shadow of my parents' expectations and the social world they inhabited. Millbrook Heights remained a constant presence in my consciousness, a reminder of the life I had rejected and the people who continued to judge my choices from their positions of inherited privilege and social authority. Little did I know that within 18 months, those same people who had dismissed me as a misguided failure would be forced to confront the reality of who I had become without their guidance and control. The woman they had rejected for choosing love over status was about to demonstrate that authentic success looked very different from their carefully constructed version of achievement. The stage was set for a revelation that would shatter their assumptions about power, worth, and the consequences of their actions. But first, I had to become the person capable of delivering that revelation. A journey that would test everything I thought I knew about myself and what I was capable of. Achieving the first indication that my exile from the Peterson family wasn't proceeding according to their expectations came 6 months after that snowy Christmas morning. I was having coffee with Daniel at our favorite cafe near his workshop when my phone buzzed with a text from my college roommate, Jessica Martinez, who still lived in Millbrook Heights. "Your mom just asked me at the grocery store if I'd heard from you lately. She seemed really surprised when I told her about your promotion. Said she had no idea you were doing so well." I stared at the message, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. My parents had clearly expected my defiance to result in immediate disaster, confirming their predictions about the consequences of choosing Daniel over family wisdom. The fact that I was not only surviving, but thriving without their guidance and financial support apparently contradicted their carefully constructed narrative about my poor decision-making. The promotion Jessica had mentioned was indeed significant. My transition from the prestigious consulting firm to the technology startup had initially seemed like a step backward in terms of traditional career metrics. Lower salary, smaller company, fewer networking opportunities with the kind of people my parents considered valuable connections. But what the startup lacked in prestige, it offered in growth potential and creative freedom. Within 3 months of joining Innovate Solutions, I had identified several inefficiencies in their client onboarding process and developed streamlined protocols that reduced processing time by 40%. My background in both business strategy and technology implementation made me uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between technical capabilities and client needs. The company's founder, Maria Santos, had recognized my contributions immediately and fast-tracked me through promotions that would have taken years at a traditional corporation. By month 6, I was leading a team of 12 developers and consultants, managing client relationships that generated over $2 million in annual revenue. More importantly, I was genuinely excited about my work for the first time in my professional life. Instead of following predetermined pathways designed to enhance family status, I was building something meaningful with colleagues who valued innovation and results over credentials and connections. The financial benefits had been substantial, as well. My base salary might have been lower than my previous position, but the equity package and performance bonuses had quickly surpassed my old compensation structure. For the first time since college, I was financially independent without any family assistance, building savings and investment accounts that belonged entirely to me. Daniel had been my strongest supporter throughout this professional transformation. Unlike my parents, who had always viewed my career primarily as a reflection of family success, Daniel celebrated my achievements as expressions of my individual talents and dedication. He understood that professional fulfillment required more than impressive titles and social recognition. His own business had been growing steadily as well. Word about his craftsmanship had spread through Chicago's design community, leading to commissions from architects and interior designers working on high-end residential projects. His workshop had expanded to include 2 apprentices, young craftspeople, eager to learn traditional woodworking techniques in an era of mass production. We had begun discussing the possibility of combining our resources to purchase property together, not for status or investment purposes, but to create a space where both our businesses could flourish. Daniel needed more room for his expanding workshop, while I was interested in developing consulting services that could operate independently of traditional corporate structures. The idea of building something together, creating a shared foundation for our individual ambitions, felt revolutionary after years of viewing relationships primarily as strategic alliances designed to enhance social positioning. With Daniel, I was discovering what authentic partnership looked like when both people supported each other's growth without trying to control or redirect it. During this period of professional and personal development, I had maintained complete silence about my circumstances to anyone connected to my family's social circle. This wasn't out of shame or regret, but from a desire to build my new life without the interference of people who had already demonstrated their loyalty to my parents' perspective. The isolation had been challenging initially, but it had also been liberating. Without the constant pressure to maintain appearances or justify my choices to people who had predetermined my failure, I could focus entirely on authentic growth and meaningful relationships. Daniel's friends had become my friends, introducing me to a community of artists, craftspeople, and small business owners who measured success differently than the social climbers I had grown up among. These were people who valued creativity over conformity, integrity over status, and personal fulfillment over external validation. Through these new connections, I had begun to understand how narrow my previous worldview had been. My parents had taught me that success could only be achieved through traditional pathways involving prestigious institutions, established networks, and carefully managed social positioning. But the entrepreneurs and artists in Daniel's circle had built meaningful lives and sustainable businesses through entirely different approaches. They prioritized authenticity over appearances, innovation over tradition, and personal satisfaction over social approval. Many had achieved financial success that equaled or exceeded what my parents considered impressive, but they had done so while maintaining their individual values and creative integrity. This exposure to alternative definitions of achievement had been profoundly educational. I began to recognize that my parents' obsession with social status and traditional markers of success reflected their own limitations rather than universal truths about valuable life choices. Their fear of Daniel's blue-collar profession stemmed from their inability to recognize value that wasn't expressed through conventional credentials and social positioning. They couldn't appreciate his artistic talent, business acumen, or personal integrity because these qualities didn't fit their predetermined categories of worth. As summer transformed into autumn, I found myself increasingly confident about the choices I had made. The life Daniel and I were building together felt authentic and sustainable in ways my previous existence never had. We were creating something meaningful, based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection rather than strategic compatibility or social advantage. But this growing confidence was tested when I received an unexpected phone call from my brother Jake. He was calling from his apartment near campus, his voice carrying a tension I hadn't heard since our final Christmas morning together. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something. Can we meet somewhere private? I don't want Mom and Dad to know I'm contacting you." The request surprised me. Jake had always been the compliant child, following our parents' expectations without question or resistance. His willingness to reach out against their wishes suggested that something significant had shifted in the family dynamic since my departure. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago, far from any location where we might encounter people connected to our family's social circle. When Jake arrived, he looked older than his 21 years, his usual easy confidence replaced by obvious stress and uncertainty. "I'm sorry I didn't contact you sooner," he began, avoiding direct eye contact. "Mom and Dad have been really clear about maintaining family unity by not engaging with your rebellion. But I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I'm starting to question whether their version of events is completely accurate." I listened without interrupting as Jake described the months following my departure. According to him, our parents had been struggling to maintain their narrative about my poor decision-making in the face of mounting evidence that I was succeeding without their guidance. "They kept telling everyone that you would come crawling back once you realized how difficult life was without family support," Jake explained. "But then people started hearing about your job promotion and seeing your social media posts about Traveling with Daniel to furniture shows and gallery openings. It didn't look like you were suffering or struggling. More problematic for their narrative was the growing recognition of Daniel's reputation in Chicago's design community. His work had been featured in several local publications, and his client list now included some of the city's most prominent architects and interior designers. Dad tried to dismiss it as luck or temporary success, Jake continued. But when the Tribune did that feature on local artisans making it in the luxury market, Daniel was prominently mentioned. It's hard to maintain that he's just a common laborer when he's creating custom pieces for million-dollar homes. The article Jake referenced had indeed been a significant milestone for Daniel's business. A lifestyle reporter had discovered his work through an interior designer and spent several hours interviewing him about his artistic process and business philosophy. The resulting feature had portrayed him as exactly what he was, a talented craftsman building a successful enterprise through skill, integrity, and dedication to quality. Mom was furious about the article, Jake admitted. She said it was just media manipulation and that anyone could appear successful if they knew how to work the publicity system. But honestly, Sarah, watching her reaction made me realize how invested she is in your failure. This observation struck me as particularly perceptive. My mother's need for my relationship with Daniel to fail went beyond concern for my well-being. It was essential to her worldview that people who rejected her guidance would inevitably suffer consequences that validated her authority. Jake's growing awareness of these dynamics had been triggered by his own experiences during his junior year of college. He had begun dating a girl named Melissa Chen, whose family background didn't meet our parents' standards for social compatibility. Melissa was brilliant, studying biomedical engineering while maintaining a perfect GPA, but her parents were recent immigrants who owned a small restaurant rather than the kind of established professionals our parents preferred for family connections. I started seeing how they talked about Melissa and her family, Jake explained, and it reminded me exactly of how they discussed Daniel. They focus on surface-level social markers while completely ignoring actual character and achievement. It made me wonder if they were wrong about him the same way they're wrong about her. The parallel between our situations had opened Jake's eyes to patterns in our parents' behavior that he had previously accepted as normal family dynamics. Their need to control their children's romantic relationships wasn't motivated by genuine concern for our happiness, but by their obsession with maintaining and enhancing family social status. I've been doing some research, Jake continued, lowering his voice as if sharing classified information. I looked up Daniel's business online, read reviews from his clients, even visited one of the galleries that sells his pieces. Sarah, his work is incredible. These aren't just functional furniture pieces, they're genuine art. And his clients include some seriously wealthy and influential people. Jake's independent investigation had revealed what I had known all along. Daniel's profession was neither common nor unsuccessful by any reasonable standard. He was a master craftsman whose skills commanded premium prices from discerning clients who valued quality and artistry over mass production. But the thing that really got to me, Jake said, was realizing that Mom and Dad never even tried to understand what he does or appreciate his talents. They decided he was unsuitable based purely on the fact that he works with his hands, and they've been committed to that judgment ever since. This recognition had led Jake to question other aspects of our parents' authority and decision-making. He had begun to notice how they manipulated situations to maintain control, how they reframed challenges to their authority as evidence of emotional instability or poor judgment in their targets. I think I'm starting to understand why you left, he said finally. It wasn't really about Daniel specifically, was it? It was about refusing to let them control your life indefinitely. His insight was exactly correct. While Daniel had been the immediate catalyst for our final confrontation, the deeper issue had been my parents' expectation that they would continue to shape my major life decisions indefinitely. Their opposition to my relationship had been just the most recent example of a pattern that had controlled my choices for 25 years. I shared this perspective with Jake, explaining how liberating it had been to make decisions based on my own values, rather than constantly calculating parental approval. I described the professional opportunities I had discovered when I stopped filtering career choices through their social preferences, and the personal growth I had experienced in relationships built on authenticity rather than strategic compatibility. I don't regret leaving, I told him honestly. The only thing I regret is not recognizing their manipulations sooner and breaking free earlier. I wasted years trying to be the daughter they wanted instead of discovering who I actually was. Jake listened intently, asking thoughtful questions about my work, my relationship with Daniel, and my future plans. It was the first genuine conversation I had with a family member in years, free from the performance and careful positioning that had characterized all my previous interactions with relatives. As we prepared to leave the coffee shop, Jake made a request that surprised me. Would it be okay if I met Daniel? I mean, actually met him, not in the hostile environment Mom and Dad created. I'd like to form my own opinion based on who he actually is rather than their characterizations. Their request touched me deeply. Jake was risking parental disapproval to seek authentic understanding, demonstrating the kind of independent thinking our parents had always discouraged. His willingness to challenge their narrative about Daniel represented significant personal growth and courage. We arranged for Jake to visit Daniel's workshop the following weekend, ostensibly as part of a college project about local artisans and small business development. This cover story would allow him to explore his genuine curiosity, while providing plausible deniability if our parents discovered his contact with us. The visit exceeded all expectations. Jake spent 3 hours with Daniel, learning about furniture design, woodworking techniques, and the business challenges of building a craft-based enterprise. Daniel had been generous with his time and knowledge, treating Jake with the respect and attention our parents had never shown him. I can't believe they dismissed him so completely, Jake said afterward. He's incredibly knowledgeable, obviously successful, and genuinely interested in other people. The way he talked about you, about supporting your career goals and encouraging your growth, it's nothing like the controlling dynamic they predicted. More importantly, Jake had witnessed firsthand the quality of Daniel's work and the respect he commanded from clients and colleagues. During the visit, 2 different customers had come to discuss commissioned pieces, both treating Daniel as the skilled professional he was rather than the common laborer our parents had characterized him as. He's not just successful, Jake observed. He's building something meaningful and sustainable, and his relationship with you is nothing like the disaster they've been predicting. You both seem genuinely happy and supportive of each other. This direct contradiction of our parents' narrative had profound implications for Jake's understanding of family dynamics and his own relationship choices. If they had been so fundamentally wrong about Daniel and my capacity for independent decision-making, what else might they be wrong about? Over the following weeks, Jake and I maintained discreet contact while he processed these revelations. He had begun to recognize similar patterns of control and manipulation in their responses to his relationship with Melissa, their career guidance for his major and internship choices, and their management of his social connections. I think I've been living the same kind of controlled existence you escaped, he admitted during one of our conversations. The difference is that I've been compliant enough that they haven't needed to resort to ultimatums and dramatic confrontations. But his growing awareness of their manipulation tactics was making compliance increasingly difficult. He found himself questioning their advice, seeking independent information about opportunities they discouraged, and making small choices, based on his own preferences rather than their expectations. This gradual awakening was complicated by his continued financial dependence on our parents and his position as the remaining good child, whose success validated their parenting methods. Unlike me, he couldn't simply reject their authority without jeopardizing his education and future prospects. I'm starting to understand the impossible position they put you in, he said. They make their support conditional on compliance, but they also make it almost impossible to build independence without that support. It's a sophisticated trap. His analysis was astute. Our parents had structured their relationships with us to maximize dependency while disguising control as guidance and love. They provided support that came with so many conditions and expectations that accepting it meant surrendering autonomy, but rejecting it meant facing immediate practical consequences that could derail our goals and ambitions. Breaking free from this system required not just emotional courage, but practical alternatives that could replace their support while we built independent capabilities. I had been fortunate to have skills and experience that translated into immediate earning potential, but Jake's situation was more complex due to his student status and limited work experience. As autumn progressed into winter, Jake continued to navigate the challenging balance between maintaining family peace and developing authentic independence. He had become more strategic about which battles to fight, choosing moments of resistance that wouldn't trigger their most severe control mechanisms while gradually building his capacity for eventual autonomy. Meanwhile, my own life continued to flourish in ways that contradicted every prediction my parents had made about the consequences of defying their wisdom. My professional responsibilities had expanded again, with Maria Santos offering me a partnership track that would make me a partial owner of Innovate Solutions within 2 years. The opportunity represented everything my parents claimed to value: financial success, professional recognition, and significant responsibility. But it had emerged from choices they had opposed, built on relationships they had discouraged, and developed through approaches they had deemed inappropriate for someone of my background and education. Daniel and I had also made significant progress toward our shared goal of purchasing property together. We had been quietly researching opportunities in emerging neighborhoods where we could establish both his expanded workshop and my consulting practice. The plan was ambitious but realistic, based on solid financial projections and careful market analysis. During this period of growth and planning, I occasionally wondered whether my parents ever questioned their handling of our relationship or recognized that their predictions about my inevitable failure had been incorrect, but I felt no desire to reach out or attempt reconciliation. The clarity that had emerged from our final confrontation had only strengthened over time. The woman they claimed to miss had never really existed. She had been a carefully constructed performance designed to serve their social ambitions. The person I had become without their guidance and control was someone they had never bothered to know or understand. As my first Christmas season without family approached, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. Sadness for the authentic family relationships I had never experienced, but anticipation for the holiday traditions Daniel and I were creating based on our own values and preferences. We planned to spend Christmas at his workshop, sharing a quiet meal while he showed me advanced woodworking techniques I had been learning. It would be a celebration of the life we had built together, grounded in mutual respect and authentic affection rather than obligation and social performance. Little did I know that this approaching holiday season would bring revelations that would fundamentally change the balance of power between my parents and me. The daughter they had dismissed as a failure was about to demonstrate capabilities they had never imagined, while their own carefully constructed social position was about to face challenges they were unprepared to handle. The stage was set for confrontations that would expose the true nature of their values and the actual consequences of their choices. But first, I had to complete the transformation from their compliant daughter into a woman capable of wielding power they had never suspected I possessed. The revelation began with a seemingly routine phone call from my real estate agent, Patricia Williams, in late November. Patricia had been helping Daniel and me search for properties that could accommodate both our business expansion plans and our desire to build a shared future together. "Sarah, I have something interesting to show you," she said, her voice carrying an unusual excitement. "A property just came on the market that I think could be perfect for your needs, but there's a personal element you should know about before we schedule a viewing." The property she described was a magnificent lakefront estate in Millbrook, Heights, the same exclusive community where I had grown up. The house had been built 15 years earlier by a successful entrepreneur who had spared no expense in creating his dream home. 8,000 square feet of luxury living space, professional-grade workshop facilities, home office complex, and 4 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds with private lake access. "It's everything on your wish list," Patricia explained. "Space for Daniel's expanded workshop, perfect setup for your consulting practice, and room to grow your businesses." "But Sarah, this house is 3 doors down from your parents' property. I wanted to make sure you're comfortable with that proximity before we invest time in viewing it." The irony was extraordinary. The property that perfectly matched our professional and personal needs happened to be located in the heart of the social world that had rejected me. But rather than feeling intimidated by this proximity, I found myself intrigued by the symbolic possibilities. "What's the asking price?" I asked, already calculating our financial capacity and investment potential. $2.8 million, Patricia replied. "It's been on the market for only 48 hours, but properties like this in Millbrook Heights typically generate multiple offers quickly. If you're interested, we should move fast." The price was substantial, but not impossible. Between my equity position at Innovate Solutions, Daniel's business assets, and the investment accounts I had been building over the past year, we could structure a competitive offer with reasonable financing. More importantly, the property represented exactly the kind of long-term investment that would provide space for both our businesses to flourish. That evening, Daniel and I discussed the opportunity with the practical focus we brought to all our major decisions. The location's personal history was certainly a factor, but it couldn't be the determining element in such a significant financial commitment. "From a business perspective, it's ideal," Daniel observed, reviewing the property specifications Patricia had provided. "The workshop space is already designed for serious craftsmanship, with proper ventilation, electrical capacity, and room for industrial equipment. I wouldn't need to invest in modifications or expansions for at least 5 years." The home office complex was equally well-suited to my consulting practice, with multiple meeting spaces, high-speed internet infrastructure, and the kind of professional atmosphere that would impress potential clients. The property could accommodate both our current businesses and provide room for future growth. "The personal dynamics are complicated," I acknowledged. "Living that close to my parents could create ongoing tension and awkward encounters, but it could also demonstrate very clearly that their predictions about my future were incorrect." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "The question is whether you want that kind of ongoing relationship with their judgment and opinions. Once we're established in that neighborhood, every choice we make will be visible to them and subject to their commentary." It was a valid concern. My parents' obsession with appearances and social positioning meant that our success would inevitably be analyzed through their particular lens of status and appropriateness. They might acknowledge our financial achievement while continuing to dismiss our life choices as somehow inadequate or inappropriate. But as we discussed the implications, I began to realize that their potential reactions were less important than the opportunity itself. The property represented everything Daniel and I had been working toward: professional space, personal sanctuary, and long-term investment in our shared future. "I think we should view it," I decided. Not to prove anything to my parents, but because it genuinely meets our needs and supports our goals. If it's the right property for us, their proximity shouldn't prevent us from pursuing it. We scheduled a viewing for the following afternoon, approaching it with the same careful analysis we would apply to any significant investment. Patricia met us at the property with comprehensive documentation and market comparisons that would inform our decision-making process. The house exceeded even our elevated expectations. The previous owner had been a successful architect who had designed the space with both aesthetic beauty and functional efficiency. Every room served multiple purposes, with built-in storage, flexible layouts, and high-end finishes that would age gracefully over time. The workshop facilities were particularly impressive, featuring professional-grade equipment, climate control, systems, and security features that would protect both tools and finished pieces. Daniel spent nearly an hour examining the space, testing equipment, and envisioning how his current operations could expand within this environment. "This isn't just adequate," he told Patricia. "This is better than anything I've seen in commercial." Workshop spaces. The previous owner clearly understood serious craftsmanship and invested appropriately in supporting it. The home office complex was equally well designed, with separate entrances for client meetings, conference facilities that could accommodate presentations and collaborative sessions, and technology infrastructure that supported sophisticated business operations. As we toured the property, I began to envision not just how our current businesses would fit into this space, but how the environment could enable growth and innovation we hadn't previously considered. The setting could support expanded consulting, services, collaborative projects with other professionals, and the kind of integrated business model that combined Daniel's craftsmanship with my strategic capabilities. From an investment perspective, Patricia noted as we concluded the tour, Millbrook Heights properties have appreciated consistently over the past decade. Even if your business needs change, this would likely maintain strong resale value. The financial projections supported her assessment. The property represented not just operational space, but long-term wealth building that aligned with our goals for financial independence and business development. That evening, Daniel and I ran detailed financial calculations, considering various scenarios for financing, monthly obligations, and return on investment. The numbers worked, requiring significant commitment, but remaining within our capacity if both our businesses continued their current growth trajectories. "The only real question," Daniel observed, "is whether you're prepared for the social dynamics that will inevitably result from this choice. Your parents aren't going to ignore our presence in their neighborhood." He was absolutely right. Moving into Millbrook Heights would make our success visible to the entire social community that had supported my parents' narrative about my poor decision-making. It would force them to reconcile their predictions with the reality of our achievements. But rather than feeling intimidated by this prospect, I found myself energized by it. For over a year, I had been building a successful life based on authentic choices, rather than inherited expectations. The opportunity to demonstrate these results in the very community that had dismissed my potential felt like appropriate closure to a difficult chapter. "I think I'm ready," I told Daniel. "Not to prove anything to them specifically, but to claim space for the life we've built together. We deserve to pursue opportunities based on their merit, not limit ourselves because of other people's judgments." The next morning, we submitted a competitive offer on the property, structured to demonstrate serious intent while protecting our interests if negotiations became complicated. Patricia handled the details with her characteristic professionalism, ensuring that our proposal would stand out among the multiple offers she expected the property to receive. Within 24 hours, we learned that our offer had been accepted. The sellers had been impressed by our financial qualification and the straightforward terms we had proposed. We would close on the property in 60 days, allowing time for inspections, financing finalization, and the logistical planning required for such a significant transition. The news felt surreal. After 18 months of building independence from my family's expectations and influence, I was about to become their neighbor in the exclusive community where appearances mattered more than substance and social positioning, defined personal worth. But this time, I would be entering Millbrook Heights on my own terms, as a successful professional and business owner, rather than a compliant daughter whose achievements served someone else's social ambitions. The woman who had been rejected for choosing love over status was about to demonstrate exactly what authentic success looked like. As word of the sale began to circulate through Millbrook Heights' active gossip network, I knew it would only be a matter of time before my parents learned about our purchase. The daughter they had written off as a failure was about to become their neighbor, living in a house that exceeded their own in both size and value. The stage was set for revelations. that would fundamentally challenge their assumptions about power, success, and the consequences of their choices. But first, Daniel and I had to navigate the complex process of establishing ourselves in a community that had once rejected us, while building the future we had envisioned together. The morning of our move into the Millbrook Heights estate dawned, crisp and clear in early February. Professional movers had been loading trucks since 6 a.m., transferring our belongings and Daniel's workshop equipment with military precision. I stood on the wraparound porch of our new home, watching the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and pink, when I spotted a familiar figure power-walking along the neighborhood's pristine sidewalks. My mother, Linda Peterson, was approaching, at her usual brisk pace, earbuds in place and designer athletic wear coordinated perfectly despite the early hour. Her routine had always included morning walks through Millbrook Heights, a chance to maintain her figure while conducting surveillance on neighborhood activities that might require her social commentary. She was less than 50 yards away when recognition dawned. Her stride faltered momentarily as she processed what she was seeing. Moving trucks, my unmistakable silhouette, and Daniel directing workers who were carefully transporting a magnificent dining table he had crafted from reclaimed walnut. For a moment, we simply stared at each other across the manicured landscape that had once defined the boundaries of my acceptable world. 18 months had passed since our last interaction. 18 months during which she had undoubtedly refined her narrative about my inevitable downfall and eventual return to family wisdom. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the compliant daughter who had been ejected from their Christmas celebration. My hair was longer, styled with confidence rather than careful conformity. My clothing reflected personal taste, rather than family-approved respectability. Most significantly, my posture conveyed the quiet assurance of someone who had discovered her own worth, independent of external validation. Linda approached slowly, her expression cycling through confusion, anger, and what might have been reluctant curiosity. "Sarah," she said when she reached the edge of our property, her voice carefully modulated to project concerned authority despite her obvious shock. "What exactly is happening here?" "Good morning, Mother," I replied pleasantly, maintaining the courteous tone I would use with any neighbor. "Daniel and I are moving into our new home. I hope the trucks aren't disturbing your walk." The casual reference to our new home clearly struck her like a physical blow. Her gaze swept across the property's impressive dimensions, taking in the professional landscaping, the luxury vehicles in the circular driveway, and the obvious quality of furnishings being moved into the house. "This is the Whitmore estate," she said, as if stating this fact might somehow negate what she was witnessing. "This property sold for over $2 million. You can't possibly afford something like this." Her automatic assumption that my financial capacity remained static, frozen at the level of dependence she had known 18 months earlier, revealed everything about her mindset. In her world, people who defied family wisdom didn't achieve independent success. They struggled, until reality forced them to acknowledge their mistakes and return to appropriate guidance. "Actually, we closed on the property last month," I replied matter-of-factly. "The financing worked out quite well, thanks to both our businesses performing beyond initial projections." Daniel approached from the direction of the moving trucks, carrying a hand-carved jewelry box that showcased his artistry. His presence beside me created a visual representation of everything my parents had dismissed. A successful partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and authentic affection. "Mrs. Peterson," he said politely, nodding in acknowledgement, but maintaining professional distance. His tone was neither defensive nor conciliatory, simply courteous in the way successful people acknowledge neighbors without seeking approval or validation. Linda's response was immediate and visceral. The sight of Daniel, clearly comfortable and confident in this exclusive neighborhood, seemed to challenge fundamental assumptions about social hierarchy and appropriate success markers that had shaped her worldview for decades. "I don't understand how this is possible," she said, her voice rising despite obvious efforts to maintain composure. 18 months ago, you were throwing away your future for this relationship. You had no savings, no realistic prospects, no support system. How could you possibly have acquired a property like this? The question revealed her complete ignorance about the life Daniel and I had built during our estrangement. She had been so committed to her narrative about our inevitable failure that she had never investigated the actual trajectory of our careers or financial development. Perhaps you should discuss that with Dad when he returns from his morning jog, I suggested, nodding toward the familiar figure of Robert Peterson approaching from the opposite direction. I'm sure you'll both want to understand the full situation. My father's approach was more dramatic than my mother's controlled shock. He stopped dead in his tracks when he recognized the scene unfolding in front of the property he had often referred to as his dream home. Robert had frequently commented during neighborhood walks about the Whitmore estate's perfect design, ideal location, and the kind of prestigious lifestyle it represented. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, abandoning any pretense of neighborly civility. "Sarah, if you're involved in some kind of financial fraud or illegal activity, I won't hesitate to contact the authorities." His immediate assumption that our success must involve criminal behavior perfectly encapsulated his inability to conceive that we might have achieved prosperity through legitimate means. In his mind, people who rejected family guidance simply weren't capable of independent achievement at this level. "There's no fraud involved, Dad," I replied calmly. "Daniel's furniture business has been featured in Architectural Digest and Chicago Magazine. My consulting firm has contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. We've been building successful careers while you've been expecting us to fail." The mention of specific prestigious publications and major corporate clients clearly stunned both parents. These were exactly the kinds of achievements they valued and pursued, but they had never imagined that we could attain them without their guidance and connections. Daniel stepped forward slightly, his presence commanding respect through quiet confidence rather than defensive justification. "Mr. and Mrs. Peterson," he said formally, "I understand this situation might be surprising, but Sarah and I have worked very hard to build our businesses and establish ourselves professionally. This property represents our investment in both our personal future and our continued business growth." The measured professionalism of his response, delivered without apology or explanation beyond basic courtesy, seemed to disorient them further. They had expected to encounter failure, desperation, or at minimum, acknowledgement that their predictions about our incompatibility had been correct. Instead, they were confronting evidence that contradicted every assumption they had maintained about the consequences of defying their authority. The daughter they had dismissed as emotionally unstable was clearly thriving. The son-in-law they had rejected as unsuitable was obviously successful. The relationship they had predicted would end in disaster had instead produced prosperity and stability. "This doesn't make sense," Linda said, her voice carrying the bewilderment of someone whose fundamental beliefs about reality were being challenged. "You had no money, no real prospects, no family support. People don't just suddenly become wealthy enough to buy properties like this." Her confusion was understandable from her perspective. Linda had spent decades believing that success required family connections, inherited advantages, and careful social positioning. The possibility that authentic talent, hard work, and strategic decision-making could produce comparable results without those traditional support systems simply didn't compute within her worldview. "We didn't suddenly become wealthy," I explained, patiently. "We built sustainable businesses based on providing real value to clients who appreciate quality work. It's taken 18 months of consistent effort, but the results have exceeded our initial projections." Robert's face had been growing progressively redder as he processed the implications of our success. "Even if you've had some temporary business success," he said, clearly grasping for ways to maintain his superior position, "this kind of lifestyle is unsustainable without proper financial management and family support. You're overextending yourselves. And when the inevitable downturn comes, you'll have no safety net. His prediction carried the desperate edge of someone whose authority depended on our eventual failure. If Daniel and I could achieve long-term prosperity without their guidance, it would invalidate decades of assumptions about the necessity of their control and the wisdom of their decisions. Actually, Daniel interjected with the quiet confidence of someone stating verifiable facts, our financial planning has been quite conservative. We purchased this property with 25% down payment, and our monthly obligations represent less than 30% of our combined income. We've also established substantial emergency reserves and retirement accounts. The specificity of his financial details, delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had nothing to hide or justify, clearly shocked both parents. They had never expected us to demonstrate the kind of sophisticated financial management they considered evidence of maturity and success. A black sedan pulled into our driveway, and Maria Santos, the founder of Innovate Solutions, emerged with her characteristic professional energy. She was arriving for a brief meeting about my expanding role in the company and the home office setup that would support my increased responsibilities. Sarah, the space looks perfect for the video conferencing system we discussed, Maria called out, approaching with the natural authority of a successful entrepreneur. Her presence provided additional evidence of my professional standing and the caliber of colleagues I worked with regularly. I made brief introductions, watching my parents' expressions as they realized they were meeting someone whose business success and professional network clearly exceeded their own. Maria's casual references to international clients, venture capital, partnerships, and expansion plans painted a picture of the sophisticated business world I now inhabited. Your daughter has been instrumental in our growth strategy, Maria told my parents with genuine enthusiasm. Her ability to bridge technical capabilities with client needs has opened markets we never could have accessed otherwise. We're very fortunate to have her as a partner. The word partner hung in the air like a revelation. My parents had assumed that any success I achieved would be modest and temporary, not the kind of significant professional advancement that Maria was describing. The realization that I held equity in a rapidly growing company clearly challenged their assumptions about my capabilities and prospects. After Maria departed for her next appointment, my parents remained standing at the edge of our property, clearly struggling to process everything they had witnessed. The evidence of our success was overwhelming and undeniable, but it contradicted so many fundamental beliefs about family authority and the consequences of defying parental wisdom. I still don't understand how this happened so quickly, Linda said finally, her voice smaller than before. 18 months ago, you were living in that warehouse apartment, working for a company we'd never heard of. How did you go from that to this? Her question revealed the core misunderstanding that had shaped their treatment of our relationship. They had never recognized that the warehouse apartment represented a strategic choice rather than a limitation, that the unknown company was actually a rapidly growing startup with enormous potential, that our modest beginning was a foundation for growth rather than evidence of failure. The warehouse gave us low overhead while we built our businesses, I explained. The startup provided equity opportunities that traditional corporations don't offer. Every choice we made was designed to maximize long-term potential rather than immediate appearances. Robert shook his head, clearly struggling to reconcile this strategic thinking with his image of us as impulsive and short-sighted. But you had no guidance, no family connections, no established support system. How could you navigate complex business decisions without proper advice? His question encapsulated the fundamental difference between their approach to success and ours. They believed achievement required inherited advantages and external validation, while Daniel and I had discovered that authentic success could be built through competence, integrity, and strategic thinking. We educated ourselves, Daniel replied simply. We researched markets, studied successful business models, and learned from mentors who had achieved the kind of results we wanted. We took responsibility for our own development instead of depending, on others to guide our choices. This self-directed approach to professional development was completely foreign to my parents' experience. They had always relied on established networks and traditional pathways, never imagining that individuals could create their own opportunities through initiative and strategic thinking. As the morning progressed and more moving trucks arrived, neighbors began to emerge from their homes to observe the spectacle. Millbrook Heights was a community where major changes were rare events that generated significant interest and speculation. I watched my parents' growing discomfort as they realized their dramatic rejection of their daughter was becoming public knowledge through our obvious success. The narrative they had carefully maintained about my poor decision-making was being contradicted by visible evidence that would be impossible to ignore or reframe. Mrs. Hamilton from 2 houses down approached with the direct curiosity that characterized Millbrook Heights' social dynamics. "Linda, I heard the Whitmore place had sold, but I had no idea your daughter was the buyer. How wonderful that she's doing so well." The comment forced my mother into an impossible position. She couldn't acknowledge our success without undermining her previous characterizations of our choices, but she couldn't dismiss it without appearing completely disconnected from reality. "We're still processing this development ourselves," Linda replied carefully, her tone suggesting surprise rather than pride. "Sarah's business ventures have apparently been more successful than we anticipated." Her diplomatic phrasing couldn't disguise the fundamental admission that their predictions about our future had been incorrect. The daughter they had expected to fail had instead exceeded even their ambitious social standards for material success. Additional neighbors approached throughout the morning, offering congratulations and expressing curiosity about our businesses and future plans. Each interaction provided further evidence of our integration into the professional and social communities they valued, demonstrating that rejection of family authority hadn't resulted in the social isolation they had predicted. By midday, the major furniture and equipment had been moved into the house, and Daniel was directing the installation of specialized workshop machinery in the converted garage spaces. The efficiency and professionalism of the operation clearly impressed observers, including my parents, who remained positioned near the property edge like sentinels monitoring a situation they couldn't control. Jake arrived in the early afternoon, driving the reliable sedan he had purchased with savings from his summer internship. His independence from family vehicles represented his own growing autonomy, small but significant steps toward the kind of self-determination I had achieved through more dramatic means. "This place is incredible," he said, embracing me warmly before shaking hands with Daniel. "I can't believe you actually bought the house Dad always talks about wanting." His observation highlighted the psychological impact of our purchase beyond its practical benefits. The property represented everything my father associated with ultimate success and social achievement. Our acquisition of it without their assistance or approval fundamentally challenged his assumptions about the necessity of family guidance and traditional pathways to prosperity. "Jake!" my mother called out, her voice carrying a warning edge that I recognized from childhood. "I think you should consider whether your association with this situation is appropriate, given the family circumstances." Her attempt to control Jake's interaction with us demonstrated that their authoritarian approach hadn't changed, even in the face of evidence that their authority was neither necessary nor beneficial. They were still trying to manage relationships and limit information to maintain their version of reality. But Jake responded with the kind of quiet independence he had been developing over the past months. "Mom, Sarah, and Daniel are my family, too," he said respectfully but firmly. "I'm proud of what they've accomplished, and I want to maintain my relationship with them regardless of your disagreements." His statement represented a fundamental challenge to the family loyalty system that had controlled our behavior for decades. Jake was choosing authentic relationships over inherited obligations, demonstrating the same courage that had driven my original decision to prioritize love over manipulation. The afternoon brought additional revelations that further dismantled my parents' assumptions about our circumstances. A delivery truck arrived with the custom office furniture Daniel had created for my home consulting practice, pieces that showcased his artistic vision while serving practical business needs. "Daniel made all of this?" Robert asked, examining the craftsmanship with obvious appreciation despite his continued resistance to acknowledging Daniel's professional success. "The entire office suite," I confirmed. "He designed each piece specifically for my work requirements while maintaining aesthetic coherence with the house's existing architecture. The integration of Daniel's artistry with my business needs provided a perfect example of our collaborative approach to building a shared life. Unlike the traditional model my parents preferred, where spouses supported predetermined roles, Daniel and I enhanced each other's capabilities while maintaining individual professional identities." As evening approached, my parents finally departed, but not before my mother made one final attempt to undermine our achievements. "I hope you realize that material success isn't the same thing as genuine happiness," she said, her tone carrying the implication that our prosperity was somehow hollow or temporary. Her comment revealed the fundamental shift in their strategy. Unable to dismiss our financial achievements, they were now questioning whether those achievements constituted authentic success. It was a predictable evolution from people whose authority depended on our failure or inadequacy. "You're absolutely right," I agreed, surprising her with my ready acceptance of her observation. "Material success isn't the same as happiness. Fortunately, Daniel and I have both. We're building prosperity through work we find meaningful, in partnership with someone we genuinely love and respect." The distinction was crucial. Unlike my parents, who had pursued material markers of success to enhance social status and external validation, Daniel and I had built wealth through authentic achievement while maintaining our personal values and relationship priorities. That evening, as Daniel and I sat on our new deck overlooking the lake, we reflected on the day's revelations and their implications for our future relationship with my family. The confrontation had been inevitable, but its resolution had exceeded even our optimistic expectations. "They're going to have to rebuild their entire narrative about our relationship," Daniel observed, watching the sunset paint the water in brilliant oranges and purples. "Everything they've told themselves and others about our choices has been contradicted by today's evidence." He was correct. My parents would need to develop new explanations for our success that didn't require them to acknowledge their fundamental errors in judgment or the limitations of their authority. This psychological adjustment would likely prove more challenging than accepting our financial achievements. Over the following weeks, word of our move spread throughout Millbrook Heights and the broader social community my parents inhabited. The reactions ranged from genuine congratulations to barely concealed envy, but the unanimous recognition of our success made it impossible for my parents to maintain their previous characterizations of our relationship. The most satisfying response came from the extended family members who had supported my parents' narrative about my poor decision-making. Aunts and uncles who had expressed concerned disappointment about my choices began reaching out with requests to reconnect. Suddenly, interested in understanding the business strategies that had produced our rapid success. Their transparent attempts to access our professional network and business opportunities revealed the transactional nature of family relationships I had spent years trying to navigate. These people hadn't been concerned about my well-being. They had been protecting their standing with my parents while positioning themselves for potential advantage if circumstances changed. But the most meaningful development was Jake's decision to spend spring break with us, using the time to learn advanced business planning techniques while helping Daniel with a complex commissioned piece. His choice to prioritize authentic learning over family obligations demonstrated his commitment to developing independence through merit rather than inheritance. "I think I understand now why you left," he told me during one of our late evening conversations on the deck. It wasn't about rejecting family or choosing Daniel over them. It was about refusing to let other people's limitations define your potential. His insight captured the essence of the transformation I had undergone since that snowy Christmas morning 18 months earlier. The woman who had been ejected from her family's home for choosing love over social climbing had discovered capabilities and strength she never could have developed under their control. As spring turned to summer, Daniel and I settled into the rhythms of our new life in Millbrook Heights. Our businesses continued to grow, with Daniel's workshop becoming a destination for clients seeking truly custom furniture, and my consulting practice expanding to include international projects that leveraged our combined expertise. The house had become more than a residence. It was a statement about the possibilities that emerged when people had the courage to pursue authentic success rather than inherited expectations. Every room reflected our values and choices, from the art we collected to the books we read to the way we organized our work and leisure time. My parents remained our neighbors, encountering us regularly during community events and social gatherings they couldn't avoid without appearing petty or vindictive. These interactions were polite but distant, acknowledging our shared history without pretending that fundamental reconciliation was possible or desirable. They had made their choice 18 months earlier when they prioritized their social ambitions over their daughter's happiness. I had made mine by choosing authentic love and partnership over inherited limitations. The consequences of those choices were now visible to the entire community that had once supported their authority. The woman they had rejected for being insufficiently compliant had become the neighbor who exceeded their achievements while maintaining her personal integrity. The relationship they had dismissed as inappropriate had produced the kind of partnership they claimed to value. The man they had characterized as unsuitable had proven more successful and principled than the alternatives they had preferred. Standing on our deck as another day ended over the lake we now called home, I felt profound gratitude for the courage that had led me to choose love over manipulation, authenticity over approval, and personal growth over inherited limitations. The emerald waters reflected the evening sky like a mirror, showing me a future that belonged entirely to Daniel and me. The invisible boundaries that had once constrained my choices had been replaced by horizons limited only by our imagination and commitment to each other. It was, I realized, exactly the kind of success story my grandmother would have celebrated, built on merit, sustained by integrity, and measured by the authentic happiness it created rather than the social status it achieved. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.